Morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Global Chamber. And we're going to having a great conversation today about hot markets, hot things around the world that you should know and think about. And we've got some great speakers from every corner of the world talking about different markets. I'm Doug Brunke, Global Chamber founder and CEO. I'm based here in Scottsdale today, and our speakers are everywhere else. We have a dedicated, here's another member here in our local office here who are visitors and who are watchers and contributors. And so they're rooting themselves on to be strong supporters of what we're going to be talking about today. And they have a lot of interest. Thanks, guys and ladies, or just guys.
Just guys.
Our first speaker is Abdelhak Benkerroum. He's the founder and director of Eastheimer Training and Consulting. Abdel is very often our go-to person for China, and he should be on your Rolodex and in your database to contact as well. He is in the middle of all sorts of things. And Abdel, congratulations. I saw on LinkedIn where you had a new client on Monday and you were announcing it. So congratulations on that. Thanks for all that you do for Global Chamber. You're multiple language speaker, English, French, Arabic, and Berber. You understand Spanish and Chinese. You're in Shanghai, and you've got some things you're going to share with us today about the market there. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you. And hello, everyone, and hello from Shanghai. I'm going to kick it off. I'm going to keep it very, very short and simple. First thing, the trade war, if you could please move to the first slide. Trade war has been accelerating some of the trends that we have seen lately regarding factories and production and supply chain here in Asia. You combine a trade war with the cost of labor that's going up in China, and then the central government's cracking down on polluting factories, and you have this massive move of foreign companies and even Chinese companies looking for their next China. What is the next destination for them to produce at low cost and be able to export to United States and other markets? And then so now the growing destinations here around China are Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Philippines, Indonesia. To some extent, there is Turkey as well. But one of the biggest countries, the main destinations today is Vietnam, and people are forecasting Vietnam to be what China is in 10 or 20 years, but that creates challenges with supply chain and skilled labor. And so if you are an American company importing your products from China, don't be surprised if if your supplier tells you they're moving their facility over to Thailand. And that creates opportunities for other companies and businesses who are capitalizing or seizing those opportunities of this move of ecosystems to other countries in the area, and opportunities in industrial parks. There are very, very aggressive policies from industrial parks, specifically in Vietnam and in other Asian countries, to attract those Chinese companies, to offer them value, to connect them with local government, to offer them all sorts of services. There's always also logistic and supply chain companies. They want to play integral role in how can they change the way they serve their customers globally, but instead of doing it out of China, doing it out of those Asian countries. There are also a lot of sourcing companies and services around the sourcing. That means if you're an American company used to buy your office supplies from China, now you're going to be looking into Vietnam, and then you have all those sourcing companies that are coming in the middle to offer you services to help you source from Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, and those other Asian countries. And another area where there is a big growth, it's legal services, and anything that's around taxation in this area in Asia, as companies are trying to figure out how they can optimize their supply chains without affecting their top line and bottom line. As I said earlier, Vietnam is positioned to benefit greatly from this switch. Just a few weeks ago, people were talking about Mexico, but then 2 days ago, Trump has talked about imposing tariffs on Mexico. And this is a discussion that China is having, and Chinese companies that were thinking about Mexico, now they start thinking about where else can we go besides Mexico. That's one of the opportunities. I would welcome foreign American companies or foreign companies to really start thinking about it, because your supplier in China today is probably not going to be in China a few years from now. And then if you're thinking about how would your business look 5 years from now, I'm not sure if China is going to be part of that picture for you, depending on your industry. If you could please move on to the next slide. The other opportunity I want to touch on, because this is the time for companies to start getting ready for the China International Import Expo. It started last year in 2018, and it's going to be happening every single year. In November 2019 is going to be the next one, and then November 2020. And this International Import Expo is a way of China to tell the whole world, we are a massive consumption country. We are welcoming imports. Anything that you want to sell into China, anything you want to feed the 1.4 billion people, this is the place to be. Last year, there were 170 countries that participated in the fair. 1 million people attended, almost $60 billion of deals. And anything that you can sell could find a place here in China International Import Expo. You just go to their websites, get in touch with the organizers. They're very efficient, and they can secure a booth or be part of a delegation, or anything that's crossed your mind whenever you think about China as a market for your products, as an importing country. Then China International Import Expo should definitely be on your radar. I mentioned there on my second bullet points that the official numbers, China government is saying they want to import for $10 trillion over the coming 5 years. And this means everything. Besides new technologies, you will find that companies that come here talk about tourism services, education services, healthcare and medical devices, pharmaceutical companies. You just name it, you find it. Of course, there are traditional ones like machinery, food and beverages, and so forth and so on. But my message to the global chamber family is, whatever you are, whatever you're producing, whatever you're selling, just go ahead to check out the China International Import Expo websites. There are definitely possibilities for you to tap on this massive market.
That sounds great, Abdel. Thank you very much. And you're right in the middle of that, and so people can contact you directly. Is that correct? And you can guide them?
Absolutely. So we help, our job is that we help Chinese companies grow overseas, and we help foreign companies grow in China. And mostly growing in China means meeting the right people, knocking at the right doors, and not falling in the traps that most foreign businesses fall into, because this market is so massive, it's so complex, and that's what we do. We facilitate those kind of businesses who want to grow in China, or Chinese who want to grow overseas.
Thank you for being our first Global Chamber Shanghai participant, and we appreciate all that you do. Our next speaker, we're going to shift continents. We're going to be talking with Tanya Touré. She's the Executive Director of Global Chamber Burkina Faso. She's in Ouagadougou, which took me a long time to figure out how to pronounce. I still don't know how to spell it, but I'm going to work on that, Tanya. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for getting Burkina Faso chapter going. You've got a great background. You've been involved in all sorts of business opportunities there in Ouagadougou and across the country, and we're looking forward to hearing more about opportunities there and in the region.
Okay. I will speak to hot opportunities in Africa. Solar energy. Many people identify the economic development of the country of the African continent as the main response to the exponential demographic growth. But the fundamental aspect is too often forgotten: access to energy. Without energy, all other fights are doomed to fail. More than 645 million Africans still fail to access to a source of electricity. Solar energy in Africa is thus possible in multiple forms: such as lighting, solar streets, individual kits, typically a power of a few watts, many plants, a few kilowatts, industrial roots. And the other sector in Africa is agribusiness. According to the report from World Bank, tripling in value since to 1918. This has been done mainly by extending the area devoted to food production taken from forests and savanna. According to the report from World Bank, the agribusiness industry has a value of 1 billion in 2013. As Africa is the paradise of biodiversity, the main challenge to remain competitive and therefore improve the quality of products in order to stay in the international markets and make the necessary inputs for economic progress. To achieve the success in agribusiness in Africa, there is a need to reinvent a convention of independent initiative ranging from small-scale farmers to large agribusinesses to processors, traders, logistic providers, insurance companies, and more quality finance service, and also called for increasing foreign investments and foreign trades. Other sectors is payment solution. There is a digital revolution in Africa and very rapid growth. In addition, the mobile equipment rate increased in 3,045% between many years. The payment solution industry is a buoyant market because each year in Africa is more than 100 billion in transactions that are made in cash. This offers a huge and lucrative financial solution service opportunity for payment solution, especially that banking of African are not high. To be competitive in this market, you have to combine simplicity, accessibility, low costs, and innovation, but also by introducing savings and insurance products. So dear project developers, investors, lenders, contractors, service providers, and products, do not hesitate to see the opportunities of these different sectors. Thank you.
Very good. There's not an earthquake there, is there? It looks like you must be on a phone. So, thank you very much. Very interesting information. And one question that we'll have for you after the speakers is around the One Africa. We'll be interested to hear your perspectives on that. And if anybody has any questions going forward, please save those for the end, and we'll be happy to provide them to both Tanya and to all the speakers. The next speaker is Sean Hull. Sean spends his time, I think, largely between the US and Europe. He's the co-founder of Mundae Consulting. He's a global advisor for Global Chamber. He's got a very strong background in large-scale consulting projects, and Sean, you're working on some things, and so what we thought to speak with you about was not Ohio State, but more focused in on business. Yeah. Oh, it's very subtle.
Very subtle.
You're getting an audience here that doesn't necessarily.
I was about to say, how can I mute the naysayers from my computer here? So.
Yeah, very impossible. So
Yeah.
but I'm sure you're used to that. But thank you for your work with Global Chamber, and we're looking forward to hearing more about opportunities that you're aware of.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. So, by the way, Arizona holds a very special place in my heart with the Buckeyes because I was there for when they won the national championship in 2002 against the Miami Hurricanes. So, thank you, Arizona, folks. So, anyway, quick story that I have to tell. About 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, a UK organization that I compared to Doctors Without Borders, they were more like business people without borders, actually contacted me. They were interested in having me project manage a project in Africa. Super interesting project. This guy had invented basically a way to create coal out of wood residue, wood chips. So then instead of burning coal or, for things, you could use this wood, and it was clean, it was efficient, it was cheap, super interesting. Anyway, I tell that story because at the end of the interview, the guy from the UK says, so, and knowing this is going to Africa, he goes, so what languages do you speak? And I'm like, well, I mean, I'm really but I'm fluent in German. And his response was, well, the Germans tend to think that they know what they're doing. So no need for project managers there from our organization. So anyway, I tell that story partly because that's my vocation. I'm a program project manager by, I call it by vocational birth, if you will. I operate out of, the Washington, D.C. area, and then Munich, Germany right now. Hopefully, as Cesar knows, hopefully soon also something out of Puerto Rico. A lot of the projects that I'm involved with are very large, I call them enterprise transformational projects. Primarily, I've done work in the insurance industry. So those are the type of projects that I see. So I'll talk a little bit quickly about Germany, especially from my on the grounds or boots on the ground experience. I told that story in the beginning also partly because in Germany, what I see really is that the Germans want for not much. So as far as opportunities go in Germany, I think what really stands out to me in Germany right now are things that involve what I call high or emerging technology. So there is a demand for such things. There's a lot of autonomous cars. A lot of the car manufacturing are looking for technologies and people well-versed in things that have to do with autonomous cars. Somebody was just asked me if I knew somebody who was a radar technologist. I have to admit, I didn't even know what a radar technologist was. Abdel, it was super interesting. You mentioned flying cars in your presentation because there is a firm in Munich, I'll call them a startup, a very large firm, but they're creating autonomous flying cars, if you will. Lots of opportunities there. I went to their job board not too long ago, and literally they had hundreds of positions open for people with that expertise. So in Germany, I think the biggest opportunities there are, like I said, in the high tech or the emerging technology fields. And what do I do now? Like I said, I'm a project program manager, but what I'm doing now is, and this is how I like to describe it, along with my network or a network of people that I know or firms, is swarm problems. So when I say swarm problems, the idea here is to collect disparate or different people, or like I said, firms, to address very specific problems. So an example of this is myself. I just completed not too long ago an expression of interest for the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. They have a very large project on deck to turn all of their teaching material, if you will, into a virtual learning platform, if you will. So I partnered with a firm here in DC, a consulting firm that does a lot of LMS work. Georgetown University was super interested, and then a lot of people who have the experience that the EBRD was looking for. So anyway, that's what I mean with swarming projects. So, can I switch slides, Cesar, or do you need to? Thank you. So, speaking of network, which I just mentioned, I mentioned my boots on the ground experience in Germany, but a lot of times when looking for opportunities, I like to cast a wider net, and this is what I would advise others too. You know, I do think the boots on the ground, all of us, you know, what we see, that's invaluable, but it's also valuable. There's a lot of resources out there to tap. So specifically for this presentation, I tapped some other resources. I have not heard back from them. I'm planning to meet with all of them. And if anybody who's on this webinar is interested, I certainly can put together something once I talk to them about Germany. So specifically, I contacted the U.S. Commercial Service. Here in DC, I know somebody, but they have a wealth of information. I am part of the German American Business Club in Munich. So there's several people who I'm going to talk to there. I am part of the German American Chamber of Commerce here in the US. Hopefully going to be talking to them. And then something that I don't see mentioned, or that I don't see a lot of people doing, is also to take into consideration the economic development incentives that might be available for opportunities. So Cesar and I have talked a lot about, I'm very interested in what Puerto Rico offers as incentives to set up shop there, to do business through Puerto Rico. But specifically for this presentation, I also contacted and am hoping to talk to the Bavarian Office of Economic Development. So again, the idea there is to not only have a wide net of networks, but then to tap that network to really get some data on what you're looking for. Okay, I'm going to hurry up here a little bit. Next slide, Cesar. Here is a slide that I threw in really quick last minute, because this is something I actually used just recently. So there is a software firm out of I think they're based out of South America, but their main office is in the UK. They do, generally they do what's called business process management software, but they're very interested in growing into, not only into the insurance market or insurance domain, but specifically they wanted to grow into the DACH region, the German-speaking region. So that's Germany, Switzerland, Austria, down south, southern Germany there in that area. So I was talking to some of the executives, and this is kind of what I put together for them, because they wanted my thoughts on the idea of growing into that region. So first of all, somewhere I picked up the saying, like politics, all business is local. Which means that, you know, unless you're an Accenture or somebody, most likely the vendors chosen, at least what I've seen in the insurance domain, the vendors chosen, if they're not going with some of the big players, then they're going with somebody local. But here, this bullseye thing, what that represents is my idea to these guys is, so from the outside going in, what you're doing is building, first you're building attention and then trust. So marketing is typical stuff, you show up at conferences. Influencing is more like being mentioned in trade magazines, etc. That network circle is really the important circle, and I think this is where Global Chamber really can excel, or this is the sweet spot. This network is, well, let me explain. SVA, by the way, is smallest viable audience. So what I was telling these two executives is like, don't just go into this thinking, I want to be in Munich, I want to go into the insurance domain. You have to narrow, and you got to narrow it down to very specific companies, and not even that, you got to go into even smaller, you got to narrow it down to the people within those companies that you're targeting. So I call that the smallest viable audience. So, and I've told them, once you break into, let's say you go into Allianz and Munich Re, and you talk to a couple of guys there that might end up being the ones that, you know, buy your technology, trust me, that word will spread throughout the DACH region. But anyway, that network circle around the SVA group is the key. And the key there, like I was telling these executives, is that you want to preferably partner with local people or firms that have maybe already had a relationship, let's say, with Allianz or these insurance companies. I'm racing through this because I'm short on time. There's a little bit more to this, but that's I threw this in here to kind of illustrate almost everything that I'm trying to say here. So, and then the last slide.
We're actually out of time. Could you wrap up just in a few seconds?
I'm done. So
Okay.
This is it. Here's my, and real quick, because I mentioned the EBRD, what we are looking, there's a group of us looking for, if there's anybody out there who has, knows of or has or does a small consulting firm out of Europe, preferably if you're into finance or even more specifically green finance, the EBRD has some opportunities out there. So anyway, that's it.
Thanks for tapping into the agribusiness industry that Tanya talked about. Our next speaker is also spends a lot of time in DC. It's Elshan. I don't think I've actually ever pronounced your last name, Elshan, so maybe I'll let you do that. But Elshan's been a great member for Global Chamber and a great partner with WCC International. And I know most recently you were involved with the Agribusiness venture with, or the forum in Chicago with Azerbaijan. So Elshan, thank you for what you do in the Baltic region and within the Euro-Asia region. And you're going to be talking about opportunities there and others that you know. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me. Can you hear me clearly?
Not quite. You're very low.
Okay, just a second. How about now?
You'll need to talk very loudly because your mic is set too low.
How about now?
We can't hear you. Maybe what we'll do is let's go to Scott and then come back to you because your microphone just isn't loud enough.
Okay.
Also, sorry, maybe Cesar, you can work on that while we go to Scott. So
Okay.
something must have happened there locally.
Doug, and I give you the best of luck with my last name.
Ziekewicz?
Close. Ziekewicz.
Oh,
But
nice.
after that, as you were stumbling around with the previous last name, I thought, okay, got a special surprise for you.
Yeah, and thank you for your kindness for saying that it was close because it really wasn't. Scott is out of Colorado. He's with Helix TCS. You know, and one of the as a member of Global Chamber, we certainly appreciate that. What's really interesting about Scott is the things that they're involved with at Helix are fascinating, including the cannabis market. So Scott, you're working all over the world, so appreciate you sharing your ideas today about what you're seeing out there. You're also a Thunderbird School graduate, so go T-Bird.
Yeah, and a Thunderbird wife and Thunderbird kids.
Fantastic, congratulations.
They now have become Sun Devils.
Ah, there you go, ASU
Yeah.
Sun. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. The rest of the world caught up with the global MBA theme, so that's excellent. Thank you for the introduction.
Well, please go ahead and share.
Yeah, so there's a couple slides that will come up, and we can kind of click through to like the third slide. My professional background is in investment banking, and then as I got out of investment banking, I got into software. I was in software. I built a software development company in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and it was going along well, but had the opportunity to be acquired by Helix TCS. And the reason why that's relevant is because one, the cannabis industry is global and it's professionalizing. And that's really the important thing to focus on in this presentation. So Helix TCS, a publicly traded company, We have customers from Denmark to Australia and everywhere in between. Most of our revenue is derived here in the U.S., but the international market is as or more important as what's happening here in the U.S. So in 2018, the global cannabis industry was $11 billion. In 2025, it's projected to be $146 billion. So that is a massive growth rate that is going to be experienced, and I'll explain why that's happening. And this is something that I'll come back to in the end, because we're talking about hot opportunities. And given my investment banking and investment experience, risk, return, interest rate is it's a good pricing of risk. So you can expect that in the cannabis space, there are many opportunities across the globe. However, they're fraught with risk, regulatory risk, competitive risk, banking risk. There's any number of risks in here. So by investing or looking to work in the space, you should one, demand and expect very high returns, but with high returns becomes extremely high risk. So Helix TCS has taken the approach to not tying itself to an individual market, and I'll get into exactly what I'm referring to there in a second. And in doing so, we can sell our products around the world. So the products primarily, the core of it is technology based. So the majority of our revenue is derived from seed to sell tracking, so it's compliance. So the territory of Puerto Rico, the state of New York, the state of Illinois, 9 other governments hire our software to trace all of the biomass from the time it's a small plant to the time that it goes across the counter at a retail dispensary. We also provide global exchange, commodity exchange style services. We provide compliance services. We provide security services, all in support of helping this emerging industry move into kind of the way that we understand and know business works. So nothing is happening in the cannabis industry isn't happening in another industry, whether it be the agribusiness or whether it be the retail business or whether it be the consumer products business or whether it be the pharmaceutical industry. All of those things exist, but there's a big heavy overhang. So that heavy overhang is really this. It's a patchwork of regulatory environments. So in the US, you have 35 states that have some kind of legalization. And in each of those states, it's all separate rules about how, when, what, where you can grow it. And none of it can go across state lines. The global industry is the same. So you have different rules in Uruguay, in Colombia, in Germany, and in Australia. So in dealing in this, you have to deal across a whole patchwork of regulatory framework. Just as an example, in the US, we call it a medical industry, but it's not a medical industry. It's just a farce for a recreational industry. In Europe, everything's being run through the pharmaceutical industry. So you have the German government, the Danish government, and many others that their national health insurance services are paying for medical cannabis for patients, right? So in that case, that supply chain is very different than the supply chain we have in the US. And what that means is that all producers and everything along that supply chain has to be GMP or GACP certified. And it's very tough regulatory framework. The other thing that makes the industry complicated is that regardless of whether it's convenient or not convenient, the US dollar market kind of rules the international exchange of goods and services around the world. So banks can't risk getting locked out of the Federal Reserve system and being able to deal with U.S. banks and U.S. dollars. Given that it's federally illegal in the U.S., banks in Uruguay won't open bank accounts for participants in the industry. So you have, you don't only have a banking industry, a banking issue in the US, you have a global banking issue because no bank will really touch it. There's some that are starting to, and it's moving along. But you can imagine in a rapidly growing business, $11 billion, last year growing to $146 billion. That's a lot of money to be moving around, where the big banks are not willing to really touch. Another is the global supply chain. So right now, I think that I can say that I would imagine many of the people on the phone are probably coffee drinkers. My guess is that if you don't live very close to the equator, you've never drinking coffee that was grown in the place that you live. There's a global supply chain for coffee, and that's just the way that it's the lowest cost producer and the way that industry is most efficiently working. They're growing a tropical plant in Canada. Hugely inefficient, huge costs of around energy, as you can imagine. And the reason that this is being done, and even in the U.S., we grow it here in Colorado, we grow it in Washington State, places where this plant, it wouldn't naturally grow. The global supply chain is not put together yet, but it's starting now. There's like a handful of shipments internationally that are actually working, that are actually happening. But you can imagine how difficult it would be to export and then import through a customs agent with the right proper documentation, that it didn't come from illicit sources and things of that nature. So those are three of the big, three large areas of risk in the industry. The other is just politics, right? So the Greek government is embracing the industry and wants to be the major supplier for the European market, and I think they're well positioned to do so. Well, they're having snap elections, so everything's been put on hold. All those conversations are now, being kicked down the road. Uruguay is the same situation. They want to advance and be a global leader, as they were when they first legalized it nationally. They're going through elections, and what we see is that even across the world, you see politicians really looking into this heavily to say, is this giving me political advantage or not giving me political advantage? So, you have big supporters around the world. Vicente Fox, former president of Mexico, is on our board. So you have, some pretty heavy hitters that are coming into the market. So, so from an opportunity perspective, there's massive opportunity regardless of your geography to participate in this industry. The global supply chain is just getting put together. There's a massive need for ancillary professional services in this industry. As I mentioned, it's fraught with risk. There's a lot of M&A that's happening. You can see it almost on a weekly basis, a new deal happening, new big investments happening by mainstream tobacco and alcohol companies. And you have a number of publicly traded companies that, including ourselves and many in the Canadian market. So you can expose yourself that way to invest by looking into the public equity market. So, this is a small, burgeoning, messy industry right now, but in that it makes it a massive opportunity, in that if you look at the trend of legalization around the world, this map, and if you go to the state map on the next slide, you'll see that a good portion of the population around the world and a good portion of the population in the U.S. have access to legalized cannabis. And regardless of what's happening at a federal level, this is kind of one of those things where it's going to be almost impossible to put the rabbit back into the hat. So it'll be turbulent over the coming years, but I see it being very normalized in time. And when it's normalized in time, there's going to be massive. There's going to be huge winners and some losers in the industry that choose to participate in it. So with that, I'll conclude my comments and turn it back over to you, Doug.
Appreciate it, Scott. Really interesting information. There are some questions for you, so we'll get to those in a second. However, first we'll go back to Elshan. Sorry, Elshan, that we weren't able to hear you last time. I understand it may be okay now, so please go ahead.
So please let me know if you can hear me now.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Oh, cool. Sorry about this technological things. It always happens. Again, my name is Elshan Baloghlanov. It's hard to pronounce my last name. We work, I do manage the company, small company, WCC International, out of state of Maryland. We are in import-export management business. And since 2008, we help companies, primarily US companies, sell, move, and deliver goods and services across international borders to the countries in the Caspian Black Sea region, which is a marketplace for roughly about 300 million people, if you count all these countries altogether. And today I just wanted to touch base on only two of those, since we have some opportunities I just wanted to share with you with USAID. We just recently have gotten approval to be part of their project for the next 5 years in agricultural and agribusiness, food business, and food processing industries. Well, how long we have, Doug?
You've got about another 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, sounds great. So I just wanted to bring to your attention that the marketplace geography we work with is very hungry for technology-driven projects in agriculture, whether it's smart climate, greenhouse business, or whether it's technology focused on aquaculture, aquaponics, and all these things. There is a huge, tremendous opportunity for companies serving this industry, like agriculture, food processing, packaging. There is every aspect of those type of businesses having a great opportunity if they look into much details in each country, like whether it's Azerbaijan, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and others. And what I would like to bring up to your attention, there is an opportunity from both US government incentive programs standpoint and also from the local government standpoints. There is an opportunity for public-private partnerships. If you have some solutions helping to solve local people, whether it's smallholder farmer or a big giant agribusiness, there are some incentive programs in place which will allow companies to export in this huge marketplace. According to USAID, there is a huge opportunity of around like 700 million worth of goods capable to be exported to this part of the world. There are financial incentives being offered by both local governments and US government, like grant component, interest-free loans, and things like that. And I just wanted to bring up to your attention, there is a huge incentive, there are huge incentives in aquaculture industry. So the countries are thriving to develop their own aquaculture industry from scratch, from ground zero, since all countries are focused on import substitution and local employment generation and things like that. So this is another thing that would be interesting for people involved in the in agribusiness or agriculture realm. There's a huge opportunity for vegetable processing, like tomatoes, pickle sauces, corn, and other things that require special packaging or processing. There are government incentives both in Georgia, in Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan offers interesting solutions. So just to make the long story short, I would encourage you to, if you have projects specifically pertain to agriculture and commodities, just reach out to us, whether through Global Chamber or through directly to us, so we can delve into much details depending on the industry. So wine and spirits, as you know, Doug, we recently hosted with Global Chamber the wines from the Guam countries, Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, Azerbaijan. It was very interesting. So people really enjoyed this wine tasting event opportunity in DC, here in DC. So this is something that I just wanted to bring up to your attention, like dairy products, fish farming, aquaculture, livestock, and poultry farming, everything which is related to local production, investment solicitation, investment. So keep in mind, if you have a great projects like turnkey operations, there are a lot of opportunities. For example, USAID offers up to 32% grants for local, as long as you can bring US technology, US investments into the country. Countries in the region like Central Asia, Azerbaijan, Georgia. Just keep this in mind, and without this, I just wanted to stop here and look forward to hear some questions and answers. I have few.
Okay, thank you very much, Elshan. Will there be a second Azerbaijan Agricultural Forum next year?
I heard that, yes. There is one in Minnesota, I believe, or somewhere there.
Okay. Okay, good to know. So let's get into the question phase. And so we do have quite a number of them. Let's go over to Scott regarding cannabis. Interesting that Texas is illegal with cannabis and Willie Nelson lives there. So that's a very interesting dichotomy. You mentioned about the pharma industry and lobbying. Where would you recommend investors and others to plug into the industry? Other than as a user, I suppose, in terms of, actually benefiting from a business standpoint. You've developed a foundation, a technology foundation that, that you're able to supply, which is great. What other areas can businesses plug in?
Yeah, I'm in the ancillary services arena. So obviously I'm kind of, I like that part of it, and the reason why is that otherwise you're ring fenced. If you try to do licensing in California or Canada, you're kind of ring fenced to that specific market. California right now has tons of money going into it. So if from an investment perspective, I would look at either private companies who are providing ancillary services to the industry, or public companies who are doing that. There's ETFs that are now available, so you can get some broad diversification if you want that out of Canada. But that's really, I would point people more to look at the ancillary services being provided to the industry as opposed to investing directly into a licensee, a producer, a plant touching business.
Okay, that makes sense. This is a question for Abdel. And I'll frame it in terms of Abdel speaking with you over the last several months. You were fairly matter of fact today about shifting manufacturing from China to other countries. Wondering, that's certainly an opportunity for companies to be replacing Chinese companies, but I've got to believe that there are Chinese companies that are moving their operations to those countries as well, and maybe you already have them. What are some of those other dynamics? And then could you just give us a sense of how are the people feeling about what's going on now? Are they kind of ticked off at what's going on, or because I've been sensing a little bit of anger by some of the people that I deal with, and I'm wondering what the sense is there on the ground. So kind of a two-part question.
Yeah, I start with the second one. Yeah, the Chinese people are feeling bullied, like being bullied by another nation, and you have to go back a few decades back in history to see to understand the humiliation of a Chinese nation by foreign powers, and then the same rhetoric and same feeling is coming up again. Yeah, people in the street feel like they've been pushed to the corner, and that they're being treated unfairly, and it's going to be long fights. I think it goes beyond the trade war. It's beyond exchange of products between two countries. It's going to get deeper. I think what happened with the Soviet Union a couple decades ago is taking place again here, and it's going to go into different angles, and the fight is going to be outside of China as well. It's going to take place in places like Africa, in Southeast Asia, but yeah, definitely Chinese people. From my discussions with people every day, I'm engaged here with the incubators, with governments, with the foreign chambers of commerce, including the American Chamber of Commerce. I'm engaged with every stakeholder I talk to here. Chinese people, there's a feeling that we're being bullied, we're being pushed to the corner, is that we're being asked to make concessions we cannot make, kind of subsidies, the involvement of state-owned companies and so forth and so on. So yeah, definitely, hopefully we, as a foreigner here, we try to tell people that sane minds would prevail. You got to put things in perspective and then move on, because when business works better, the world works better. But definitely the average person industry, you find that sentiment is changing. People are feeling that they've been pushed to the corner, and if they have to side with one side, of course they're gonna side with the government, and they're gonna do anything they can so they move forward, because there's a feeling that United States is trying to slow us down, and we should not let that happen.
Okay. Very good. That makes sense. Are Chinese companies relocating facilities to other parts of Asia, like Vietnam and Thailand?
Yes, there are. There are companies that they're trying to leave. Some of them manage to leave. Foreign companies, yes, they can. Chinese companies, they can. But now the difficult part is that if you are a Chinese company or foreign company, you've been operating in some districts or some city for a few years, producing, you were creating job opportunities for a few hundred people or a few thousand people, which is small by Chinese perspective, but you've been creating job opportunities, but you got some tax subsidies, or tax cuts, or you had some free land or free office space and whatever. Now that you want to leave, the government, local government is going to come to you and say, hey, you got to pay a bill. You came here and we gave you the first 3 or 5 years tax breaks, and we give you free land, we give you subsidies, we give you promotion, whatever, and now you cannot just pack and disappear. So it's very hard to leave. But Chinese companies living overseas, this has been a trend for the last few years because of the change in labor costs. And I personally know a shoes manufacturer, they shut down their factory here, moved over to Djibouti to produce in Djibouti in Africa, to produce shoes there in Djibouti, export them back to China. So going overseas to produce for Chinese market. But it's easy to get in. It's not that easy to leave, especially if you benefited from few things. And a lot of foreign companies here in China, they polluted somehow. They went a little bit above the pollution levels, but no one questioned them. Some of them, they escaped taxes and no one questioned them. But if you want to leave and tell them, hey, I'm going to put a few hundred people out in the street and pack and leave, then they're going to ask you, hey, you got to pay the tab. But yeah, the trend is there. Now, if you go to Vietnam or Cambodia or Thailand, I know for a fact, none of those countries has the ecosystem that China has created. You find skilled people, infrastructure is top-notch infrastructure, the best I've seen. And I lived and worked in Dubai, in Paris, in Texas, in Turkey, in Morocco. That's the best infrastructure I've ever seen in my life when it comes to high-tech zones, when it comes to industrial parks and ports and airports and trains and logistics. And it's just the limitless opportunities here in China in that field. And so to go and find this in Vietnam, and I hear from people who went to Vietnam, to get people, the workers in Vietnam, to work as hard and as smart as Chinese people work is going to take another 5 or 10 years to get them up to that level, because it needs time to get people into the habits of working the way things are done. And so China offers a lot of things, and you will find a lot of American companies, because of the tariffs, they want to leave, but then they cannot leave. I mean, you look around, yes, you find you find possibilities. That's why it depends on industries. Well, in some industries, you can just pack and move on. In some others, you are tied to China for a few years until other countries will be able to catch up and get to the level of Chinese skilled labor or infrastructure and the way things are done, ecosystem in general.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. The question's already been answered and it's online regarding which 5 countries are now best to export ICT, information communication technology services to. What are the tech products most in demand? And Tanya, you've already answered that. The 5 best: Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Burkina Faso, where you are, and Rwanda. An example of tech products: smartphone, computer, innovative equipment, industrial. Anything you want to add to that, Tanya? And another question for you is, what's your concept and what's your belief around the one country concept around Africa and the trade initiatives that are happening right now? Is that going to help and support investment and business in Africa? Tanya, are you there? I think Tanya's gone.
I don't think she's there. I don't see her.
Uh-oh.
Maybe.
Oh, sorry about that. Okay. So she's not going to be able to answer that. So we lost Tanya. So what we'll do is we'll cover that question in the blog, and we'll ask her offline on that. We have about 3 or 4 minutes to go, and I see, Abdel, you chimed in on that particular question. If IP is not an issue, then China is the place to be. So in terms of ICT, because of the market, right? It's such a huge market.
Yeah, and you got to be very careful about your IP. The law when it comes to China, especially the debate that you heard the last few weeks about IP, you got to be careful on how well to protect it, how well to protect your trademark, intellectual property, and so forth and so on. And also, the worst way to enter China, from my own experience, one of my main clients is a law firm. And so I know the worst way to enter China if you're in high tech is to set up a joint venture. I don't have any example that succeed in that field. There are a few other ways to enter the market, but the best way to lose your IP is to enter into a joint venture with a local company. But that's my little piece of advice. If we know a little bit more about what exactly they have in mind, what is their value added, and how different they are. Maybe what we have in China is maybe a year ahead of what's going on in other countries. But if we know a little bit more, we can make it a little bit more specific.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe one more question. This goes, Sean, to you on Brexit. And is that opening up opportunities in Germany and the rest of Europe? How are places like Frankfurt trying to compete for fintech and financial service industries, and how should we be looking at that right now?
So you just answered that question, Doug. A lot of the major banks I know have moved a lot of their operations to Frankfurt, set up shop there in anticipation of whatever might happen. Insurance company, at least the insurance companies that I've worked with, they're well diversified across the world, if you will. So even though Lloyd's of London might be based in England, obviously, they've spread out their. I mean, being insurance companies, being probably the most risk adverse industry in the world, they've figured out how to parlay that risk or how to reduce that risk. So, but great point. You see a lot of using very common terms, fin/insure tech. That has picked up drastically in Germany. So,
okay, very good. Well, we've come to the end of the hour, and again, apologize that we did lose contact with Tanya. We just lost the connection, so we'll follow up with her on that question. And the additional questions that have come in, we'll handle those in the blog post that you'll see next week. We do these conversations once or twice a week. We had an amazing one yesterday around USMCA and immigration and the border between US and Mexico for those who are doing business in North America. And I recommend you catch that blog post and that video when it comes out in the next several days as well. And obviously with the 5% tariffs that have been threatened for Mundae, stay tuned. There's more fun and nonsense to come. It's never been more important to be part of the global chamber because the trade is, for certainly an American company perspective, 85% of new business in the next 5 years is outside the US. And so we certainly encourage American companies to be looking outside. And there's so much, as we all know, going on in the rest of the world that, that's where the action is and that's where we need to be, despite people trying to cling on to nonsense around tariffs and things like that. We've got to keep pushing and don't let it discourage you in your international investing, exporting, and importing, because the trend line is going to continue for all of us to make more money going forward. So thanks again to all our speakers. You're all amazing. Appreciate your support and collaboration with Global Chamber, and check out the next Globinar coming up very soon. Thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks all.